Okay, everybody. Hope that the gorilla went well for you today. I wanted to go through and talk to you about our next topic, which is going to be political parties and elections. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because I just want this to pique your interest and let you come in with questions. So as you take notes on this, make note of the things that you're unsure about and the things that you have questions about, and that'll be what we spend class tomorrow discussing. We have the definition of a political party. Has 5 really key parts to it. So I'll read it. You should read it too. But make sure that you know the 5 parts of this, because eventually when we have some sort of quiz or test on this, these are the things that you'll need to make sure that are included in your definitions. A political party is a group of people. All right, so it's the people that make up the party. That's an important point to know, because these are people that work together to accomplish things, as we'll see in the other parts of the definition. This group of people are joined together on the basis of common principles. So they're not just joined together because they like to have a good time or because they are from the same geographic area. They believe in the same things about the government and the way that the government works. These people who are joined together on the basis of common principles, their goal is to control the government. That's what they want. They want to have power, to be the ones who are in governmental authoritative positions and making decisions. And in the United States, the way that they seek to control the government is through winning elections. If this was North Korea, they would control the government through the use of force. Or if this was Iran, they would control the government through religious laws. In the United States, because we're a democracy, they control the government through winning elections. And then the reason they want to win elections is not just to win, but because they want to affect certain public policies and programs, all right? Meaning they want to create policies that agree with their ideals. They want to do things with the government to help people the way that they think the government should help. So again, just to be clear, a political party the definition has 5 parts. It's a group of people who join together on the basis of common principles, who seek to control government through winning elections in order to affect certain public policies and programs. In the United States, political parties have 4 key functions. And I would just point out that there's nothing in the Constitution that says we have to have political parties. In fact, the Founding Fathers, when they wrote the Constitution, were scared to death that our country would form what they called factions or political parties. But over time, political parties developed in the United States. We can talk about why they developed later. These are the 4 jobs that political parties take on in our governmental system today. The first thing that political parties do is they nominate candidates. So whether we're talking about for president or for U.S. Senate or for governor or even for mayor or city council, the different political parties nominate candidates who are then going to run in the general election against the candidate or candidates of another party. Okay? There are 2 ways that we nominate candidates in the United States. The first is through primary elections. You may or may not know this, but November is when we have our general elections. And usually in the spring, political parties have primary elections, elections that come first, elections where they choose among themselves who the candidate for their party should be. So if you think about the 2008 presidential election, it was obviously Obama was the winner, but he became the Democratic nominee by beating Hillary Clinton and some other Democrats. The Democratic voters in the United States voted amongst themselves to pick Obama as their one choice. Okay? That series of primary elections is how the party nominated its candidates. The other thing that parties do to nominate candidates is they have conventions. A convention is just when a bunch of people with common interests come together. Teachers have conventions, doctors have conventions, lawyers have conventions. Political conventions are where members of a party get together to formally pick their candidates. Back in the olden days, the convention just chose whoever the convention wanted, the people at the convention, and there weren't any elections by the people to decide who the candidates for office would be. Today, the primary elections sort of make the decision, and the convention is just a party to celebrate the fact that certain people have been chosen as the candidates. But There are lots of political conventions, like the Ohio Republican Party and Democratic Party have a convention every year where they pick candidates for all kinds of jobs throughout the state. Obviously, the big conventions are the Democratic and Republican conventions in the year of the presidential election. You might remember that from 2012. The second job of a political party is to inform and activate its supporters. So obviously, political parties are trying to tell you what's going on and get you motivated and activated so that they hope that you go out and vote. That's a big job. You know, if you see yard signs in people's front yards, or if anyone's ever called your house or knocked on your door asking you about a specific candidate or suggesting that you should support a specific candidate, that's people in a political party, usually volunteers, trying to go out and help you to get motivated. The third job of a political party is to govern. Obviously, when a candidate from a political party wins, the goal of the party is to help that candidate carry out the agenda. So at the moment, the president is held by the Democrats, and the Democratic Party helps President Obama to govern. The fourth job of the political party is to act as a watchdog. This means if your party didn't win a particular election, your party's job is to make sure that the other party is doing what it's supposed to be doing. So, for example, in Ohio, the current governor is a Republican. He was elected in 2010. His name is John Kasich. And the Democrats' job is to be the watchdog, to point out all the things that he's doing wrong, to give speeches about the problems in Ohio so that they're informing and activating people in the state. Hey, Kasich, the Republican, is not doing a good job, and we need to change things at the next election. Republicans are doing the same thing with President Obama at the national level. So you can see how these four jobs would be the most important things that a political party would be responsible for. There are different types of political systems. So everything we've said up to this point is true of the United States. We want to shift gears a little bit and talk about the political systems of other countries, not necessarily just the United States. Sometimes you have governments where there is only one political party. That usually happens when the party that's in charge has made it a law that other parties are illegal. As you're probably sensing, one-party systems tend to be dictatorships. So if you think about Nazi Germany, North Korea today, China today, Cuba today, these are places where really only one political party is in power and all other political ideas or parties are illegal. There is no freedom of expression with regards to political speech in these countries. So a one-party system is a dictatorship because one political party is making all of the decisions and makes other different ideas illegal. A two-party system is one similar to what we have in the United States. We have more than two political parties, but we have two major parties. This system has some strengths and some weaknesses, like most things in life. Okay. The strength of the two-party system is that it's very stable. If you have an election and you only have two major candidates, you're almost always going to have a clear winner, a clear majority. And that's good because it makes the country stable. When we have an election, it's pretty clear that one side will win, and that gives us stability. We don't have to worry about who the president's going to be or having new elections because there was not a clear winner and someone only got a small percentage of the vote. The weakness of the two-party system is that because you really have two main options and a bunch of small options, you're choosing the quote-unquote least worst candidate. If your parents are Republicans or if your parents are Democrats, think about the 2012 presidential election. If your parents are Republicans and they voted for Mitt Romney, that doesn't necessarily mean that they agreed with Mitt Romney on every issue. In fact, you may know that there are certain things they disagreed with him on. Same thing with President Obama. Even though your parents might be Democrats, they might say, well, I like what Obama's doing generally, I agree with him on these points, but there are other things I have a different position. Because political parties in the United States, there's only two major ones, they're so gigantic and include so many different people with so many different opinions, it's very rare that you would agree with your candidate's presidential nominee or gubernatorial nominee or senator or House of Representatives member on every single issue. That would be very unusual. Normally, you would disagree with them on at least some positions. So you have to choose not the perfect candidate, but the candidate who's the closest to what you actually believe in. And we'll be doing an activity in class to talk about this. So a two-party system is strong because it's stable, but it's weak because you don't have as many choices, or at least not as many viable choices, which means you're oftentimes choosing a candidate who isn't exactly what you want, but is closer to what you want than the other person who has a chance to win. In the United States, the reason we only have two major parties is because we have something called single-member districts. If you think about a congressional election, or even the race for president, we only elect one candidate from each House of Representatives district, one senator at a time from each state, one president. It doesn't really matter how many votes that person gets. Whoever gets the majority of the votes gets the job. I could have 49.9999999% of the vote. But if the other person has 50.00001% of the vote, they get the job and I get nothing. That is not the way systems work in many other countries, but it is the way the system works in the United States. And that means that oftentimes when other political parties spring up, minor parties, we tend to call them, or third parties, they're quote unquote stealing ideas, stealing votes from the two major parties. So I'll give you a good example. You see Ralph Nader, that's the guy pictured on the bottom right of the screen. Ralph Nader was a candidate for president from the Green Party. Green Party are people that tend to be more liberal than your average Democrat, so they're a little bit more extreme in their views. Ralph Nader got about 2% of the vote in 2000. But because he got 2% of the vote, the people who voted for Ralph Nader were more closely aligned with Democrats than Republicans. If Ralph Nader hadn't run, Al Gore would have won the presidency and George W. Bush would have lost. Because those people who voted for Ralph Nader, they probably would have chosen to vote for Gore over voting for Bush. The day after the election, because the election was so close, Democrats attacked Ralph Nader with every possible attack you can imagine, because they said he quote unquote stole votes from them. Because we have single member districts, only one person can win, and if one of the minor parties steals votes from the extremes within the political parties, that oftentimes causes the party that's closest to their ideas to lose. This is a little bit of a complicated idea, and we'll be doing some math in class to help you figure out exactly how this works. All right. There is a lot of debate right now in the news with the government shutdown that we just finished about the Tea Party, right? And you see a picture not of the actual Tea Party, but of some bears having a tea party on the left. The Tea Party, some people say it's part of the Republican Party. There are definitely people that have a little bit more extreme views than the average Republican does. If they become a third party and split off from Republicans, will that make it very difficult for Republicans to win? Because their ideas will be split, meaning if we have one person elected from each district, the Democrat would be the one who is most likely to get the majority of the votes. This is the reason that in the United States we really only have two major parties. Now, what have been the two major parties has changed periodically throughout our country's history, but we've never really had a time where we had more than two dominant parties, and that's because we have these single-member districts where only one person wins. Most other democracies in the world are multi-party systems, including pretty much every country in Europe is a multi-party system. And multi-party systems are sort of the opposite in terms of strengths and weaknesses of the two-party systems. The strength of a multi-party system is I can find a candidate that matches up almost exactly with what I believe in. Germany is a country that has, at least 6 major parties and probably 10 or 15 more minor parties that people vote for. Because I have all of those choices, I get to vote for someone that is actually much closer to what I believe in, rather than in the United States where you have to vote for the candidate that's closest but not perfect to what you believe in. There is a problem with this, however, right? If you look at that pie chart on the bottom of the screen, you can see this is a multi-party system. You have 45% of this country that voted for the Liberal Party, 28% that voted for the Conservative Party, 7% that voted for the Green Party, and 10% that voted for the Bloc Party. Notice no one has a majority. So if the Liberal Party, got 45% of the seats in the Congress of this other country that we're talking about, it would never have a majority, and the others could join together to block anything that they wanted to do. In order to fix this problem, multi-party systems have to form coalitions to run the government. So parties have to join together to get enough votes to run the government, to have a majority. This is really unstable because these political parties don't agree on everything. So when an issue comes up that they don't agree on, it breaks the coalition and sometimes causes the government itself to collapse. Italy is a country that has gone through more than 100 different governments since World War II. There are Italian governments that don't last more than 6 weeks because the coalition is unstable, because political parties are joining together to form a majority and they're not successful. And what happens is you have to have a new election every time this happens. This causes lots of turmoil in countries and potentially is destabilizing. We don't have this problem in the United States. If you have two major parties, one party is going to have a majority of the House, majority of the Senate, and easily win the presidency. But because these multi-party systems have coalitions, it's not quite that simple and is much more complicated in terms of the weaknesses that these multi-party systems have. A question that I get asked frequently by students, so I thought I'd put it in a slide for us to discuss, is what's the difference between a Democrat and a Republican? It's hard to say because there are lots of Democrats who believe very different things and lots of Republicans who believe very different things. So it's hard to pick one issue and say this is what all Democrats believe and what all Republicans believe. But generally speaking, in 2013, a Democrat is someone who wants increased government involvement on economic issues, but less government involvement on social issues. So a Democrat would say, yes, the government should be more involved in helping workers find jobs, in helping poor people to get sort of a solid economic ground underneath them, in providing health care for people. But Democrats would be against the government being involved in people's lives on social issues. So Democrats tend to be in favor of legalized abortion, tend to be in favor of gay marriage, allowing it. On issues that affect people socially, the Democrats would want the government to stay out of the way and let people do what they want. But on economic issues, they would want the government to step in and be more involved. Republicans believe the opposite. So again, not all Republicans are this way, but the vast majority of Republicans believe the government should be less involved on economic issues. They want businesses to be able to do what they want. This includes lower taxes and lower regulation. But most Republicans believe the government should be more involved on social issues, meaning making abortion illegal, making gay marriage illegal, more close limits on immigration, less gun control. So those tend to be the differences between the two parties. Again, you can always find politicians that are exceptions to these rules, but I would say on average, the average Democrat and average Republican, this is what they believe, and that is sort of a shorthand way to think about the difference between the two parties. There are lots of people who don't fit really either of these models, and like I said, in class we'll be doing some things to help you figure that out. One last slide before we finish for today. You may or may not already identify with a political party. By the time you reach voting age, you probably will start to, consider yourself to be a Democrat or a Republican or an independent who isn't choosing. And there are lots of factors that influence which party you choose to identify with. We know from lots of years of study of this that the number one factor is your family. So if your family is Democratic, you're very likely to become a Democrat as well. If your family is Republican, that has a high influence in making you a Republican as well. These aren't the only influencing factors. There are lots of other factors as well that help to influence the way you view politics and the way you view the role of the government. Your religion, your race, your socioeconomic status, your gender, where in the country you live, your level of education, all of these things influence the way that you view the government's role in society and thus what political party you affiliate with. And if we look at these different factors, we can see what kinds of people tend to vote for one political party or the other. Again, we're always going to find exceptions. But This helps us to sort of understand a little bit more, why the two parties cater towards specific groups of people and why their policies are supported by specific groups of people within the United States. Again, I hope you learned a few things from this video, and I hope you come into class tomorrow with lots of questions so we can discuss and debate and hopefully get a good understanding of how political parties and elections work before our next quiz. Thanks.